Welcome readers to the second season of the Vidarbha Literary Festival, your friendly and all-inclusive Lit Fest. A very curious memory from school always passes my mind when I hear the word constitution. Remember the era wherein civics as a subject amounted only for 30% of the subject? Little did we realize that those precious few pages have the power to make us more upstanding, educated citizens capable of shaping destiny. Here to tell us exactly how, with a deep dive into the working of law and constitution, is author Kalpana Kannabiran. The work of Indian sociologist, attorney, columnist, author, and editor Kalpana Kannabiran on the development of Indian law is vast. She specializes in caste, indigenous Adivasi rights, gender studies, anti-discrimination law, historical sociology, social movements, disability rights, and sociology of violence. She retired from her position as professor and regional director of the Council for Social Development, Southern Regional Center, after a 10-year employment. She is a founding member of the faculty of Hyderabad's Nalsar University of Law and a founding member of the Asmita Resource Center for Women, a group dedicated to advancing women's rights. In conversation with her today is another accomplished learned lady, Neetu Kumari, functioning as our moderator for today. An assistant professor at Maharashtra National Law University, Nagpur, Maharashtra, India, and a PhD from Human Rights Studies, Jawaharlal Nehru University Rights, and jargon that envelops it all. She also has been awarded an MPhil in International Organization from Center for International Politics, Organization and Disarmament, School of International Studies, Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi. I now request our moderator to kindly escort the author on stage.
So I think welcome to one and all present here. I think as Madam also telling, we are going to have conversation with Madam. I think, and Madam no need any introduction. If any person who have any knowledge or any idea related to human rights, gender studies, international politics or constitution, she or he must be know about Madam contribution in India and outside of India also. So I am not wasting time, like your time, because I know that everyone want to listen her. So I'm not, taking too much time. Directly I'm coming with certain kind of nation related to this book. So I think first I'm going to start with ma'am. That when do you think that you are going to write this book? Because this book is on a person whose contribution is huge, right? So to concise his great contribution in few chapters, it's very difficult, especially if you are a daughter of that person. So sometimes personal biasness and other thing will also come. So when you think you are going to start with this one, and what kind of difficulties you face, ma'am?
Good afternoon to everyone present here, and I'd like to begin with much thanks to the organizers, to the Vidarbha Literary Festival. And thank you, Neetu, for that question, which in a sense forces me to take a deep dive into this book. It's a fact, as you say, that this book is very unlike any other book I have worked on. I have, of course, in all of my work engaged with law, whether from a feminist perspective or with law itself and sociology and social sciences. But this is completely something quite different. But for me, I actually don't feel that it is very much of a departure, except that with this I have outed myself because I have been involved with my father's work since the late 1990s, and never as a lawyer. I studied law much later, but I have been engaged with his ideas and his writing, and he was a lawyer. I don't know if all of you are familiar with his work, so I will just give a very brief introduction to who he was and what this book is. So K.G. Kannabiran was a lawyer. He was a criminal lawyer and specialized in constitutional law. Up until his death in 2010, 2009 was his last court appearance at the age of 80. He appeared in courts right from the magistrate's court to the Supreme Court, all across. And he was a trial court lawyer and an appellate court lawyer. He was also one of the founding leaders of the Andhra Pradesh Civil Liberties Committee in the former state of Andhra Pradesh. And at the time of his death, he was the national president of the People's Union for Civil Liberties, PUCL. So he was a lawyer of great standing, and he was an icon of the civil liberties movement. And nobody, in fact, that I have met has a difference of opinion about that. And through his long work, which spanned 5 decades, from the late 50s to 2009, his primary preoccupation was in confronting state impunity and enforcing governmental accountability. He represented large numbers of people, although people normally in the normal course identify him with opposing deaths in fake encounters or in peace processes with Maoists and so on. The areas he represented were vast, from labor rights to rights of the scheduled tribes in scheduled areas, to opposing the death penalty, to encounter deaths, of course, not only of political prisoners, but also of ordinary people accused of ordinary crime. So it was a very vast canvas. Where do I come in? I was an outlier in his work. He has 3 children. I have a brother and a sister. And I was an outlier in his work, but I was interested in what he was doing, although I was not part of the movements that he was part of. And so I did start looking at his work carefully and editing it very early on. In 1997, 98 is when I started, because he was a rather impatient writer, so he would write an op-ed and then just say, look at it, and it would need basic copy editing, which I did as a matter of habit right from 1997. And the first volume that he wrote, Wages of Impunity, was published in 2004, in which again, I curated his essays, I edited them, I wrote the book proposal for the publisher, I handled the author queries from the publisher, I did the copy editing, I did the proof checking. And so I was kind of immersed in his work all along. All of this while I was, of course, doing my own thing. I was teaching and I was writing on gender and law, mainly, as you say, gender-related stuff. So it might actually, I think, for readers who are unfamiliar with my association with him, this would really strike you as a stark departure from my work, because in fact it's like nothing that I have ever published before. Apart from which, all my other books are academic publications, and this is my first trade publisher. So there are many ways in which this kind of represents a departure. So how long is my interest in his work? I think ever since I started working on my doctorate, and that is my active engagement in his work. But in terms of my interest, it's even much earlier, because right from when we were in school, emergency was declared when I was in class 10. And so looking at survivors of torture, hearing talk about encounters was a very normal thing in our home. So in that sense, this is not a departure.
As you told that your earlier work, right? I think we all are familiar that earlier you are writing on gender, violence, and I think international law, justice, and everything. So yes, I mean, you are very correct that this book is little bit different from your previous work. So, I mean, that's why I want to ask why the name is like Speaking Constitution. Because in your earlier things, somehow you are criticizing certain aspects, right? So suddenly you start by like, what is the meaning of that speaking constitution? Why this?
Well, the first thing is that the book had to have a name. My father was actually really bad with book titles. When he published his first book, The Wages of Impunity, and I asked him, what should be the title that I give the publisher for your book? He said, call it The Labors of Sisyphus, because Sisyphus was his image of himself, that he did things and they always rolled back, and he did them again and they rolled back, but he always believed that Sisyphus someday would roll the rock to the top. So he said, call it The Labors of Sisyphus, and Orient Longman actually shot it down and said, no, it won't work as a title. So then I said, okay, you are constantly talking about impunity. Would you go with Wages of Impunity? He said yes, so that ended up being his book title. But that was during his lifetime. This was in fact an oral memoir. Like I said, he was a reluctant writer. He wrote his written arguments beautifully. He argued in court. He pursued cases. He was prolific. But if you asked him to write an academic piece of some length, he just would say, no, this is not what I want to do. So a friend of ours, in fact, asked him to write, and he said, well, I will speak, and if somebody will take it down, then you can publish my memoir. So that's how this began, in Telugu. So he spoke bilingually in English and Telugu, and it got published as a weekly column in a weekly Telugu magazine in 2007 and 8. At that point, the question of title came up, and the title that they went with was 24 Gantalu. 24 Gantalu is 24 hours. And so he said, yes, 24 hours rings a bell for criminal law, production of an arrested person within 24 hours of arrest. It also represents his preoccupation with law, which is like 24 hours. So it was called 24 Hours, A Personalized Social History. That was the Telugu title. This book is published posthumously. He died in 2010, and this book is published in 2022. And I, of course, edited the Telugu memoir quite a bit because I had to decide on a focus for the English. The English came at a particular time. It came at a time when citizenship laws were rolled back. It came at a time when there were large-scale arrests. It came at a time of grave police impunity in terms of encounter deaths. It came at an era of resurgence of state impunity. And that actually defined how I approached the presentation, of this book. Now, what title does one give this book? So I knew that Sisyphus had to be in the title. In fact, the entire family agreed that he will actually be very happy wherever he is if Sisyphus is in the title. So that was the first word I got down. But then what do I call it? Do I call it My Memories? Do I call it My Life? Do I call it My Life in Law? What do I call it? And then almost like this epiphany, one night at 3 in the morning, I suddenly woke up and said, speaking constitution. The tree, enlightenment, the speaking order is a just and reasoned order in the law. Yeah? I mean, what kind of order do you want from courts? You always want a speaking order from courts. And so I said, all right, if it is 24 Gantalu in Telugu, then what might work in English is the speaking constitution. So when I'm talking about the speaking constitution, I'm actually talking about the live constitution, a reasoned, just, fair, non-discriminatory reading of the Constitution, a true reading of the Constitution, yeah? Because I felt that this is a title that would most suit the contents of it. And then I put Sisyphus in the subtitle, which is A Sisyphean Life in Law, which was exactly I mean, it exactly describes his life in law, and it is his own description. So if there's something authentic about the title, it is the Sisyphean life, because that's in fact removed from a direct quote from him.
Yes, I think you are very true, ma'am, because constitution is a not living thing. So this is the responsibility of human right activists and the judiciary to express or to tell the correct things about constitution, because this is the responsibility of everyone. I think that's why this is the idea of Kannabiran sir, that he actually expressed what is the meaning of constitution in front of everyone. So the next question is related to, I mean, this I am asking you as you are telling that you work with him. So I think whenever we are talking about human rights jurisprudence, that time the one word is coming, I mean, who promoted this human rights jurisprudence in India, that is sir, right, Kannabiran sir. So how you are looking that his role towards covering or like carving the human rights jurisprudence in India?
If I, were to reflect on that, on the basis of this book, I won't go too far afield, but this book has 18 chapters, and the book actually gives you a fair idea of how he approached the question of human rights in a very, very concise and precise manner. We can say that his argument was very simple. If you followed the Constitution in letter and spirit, and if you followed the Criminal Procedure Code as it is meant to be followed, human rights will stand protected. The problem is, and this was another point that he raised often, the problem is that we often abdicate the Constitution to courts and lawyers, and that's where the damage is done. And one of the things that he did through his writing, through his public engagements, through the fact-finding missions that he was part of, was to impress upon ordinary people that they have a stake in the Constitution, that the Constitution belongs to every one of us as citizens of this country. It is our responsibility to understand it in all its depth, and it is our responsibility to respect human rights, civil liberties. And his argument on human rights, because now we are again at a situation, this was a situation that also came up during emergency, and I'll just reflect on that a little bit. We are now at a situation where right from the President of India and the Prime Minister to everybody else is telling us that we should not focus on rights, we should focus on duties. And he had at that time a very simple argument, that the moment you say respect fundamental rights, follow the fundamental rights chapter in the Constitution in letter and spirit, and see it as interlinked to the preamble, automatically it casts on you the duty to, if you want your fundamental rights respected, it casts on you a duty to respect the fundamental rights of the next person beside you. I think Akash put it really well in the morning, when you were talking about looking right and looking left, that speaking about fundamental rights automatically involves a respect for fundamental duties. You don't need a separate delineation of fundamental duties. We must also remember that the amendment introducing Article 51A, fundamental duties into the Constitution, was during emergency. It is a 1976 amendment. And one of the arguments Kannabiran had at that time was that you are saying that you want to impose fundamental duties on a person, and you are talking about national integrity and a new form of nationalism. This is nothing but Nazism couched, where you're talking about the greater service to the nation than insisting on your fundamental rights. Because during emergency, there was the Supreme Court decision in ADM Jabalpur saying that you can suspend fundamental rights during emergency. And then Mrs. Gandhi introduced fundamental duties. So he was really alarmed by that introduction of fundamental duties. But of course, we made our peace with fundamental duties. But under no circumstances, I think, should we forget that even if if Article 51A was not there, you would still have fundamental duties embedded in Part 3 of the Constitution.
So I think, as you also discussed, ma'am, that Sir's contribution is like in civil liberties, right? He was very much, I mean, open and vocal towards everyone. But as I discussed these things with you and earlier also, that hardly I am getting any person who don't like him, because either he was liked by opposite party also. I mean, to whom like he was fighting against. So that is the main notion. So after like, I mean, after him, the seat is like kind of vacated. Like, so how you think that after his death, like how this civil liberty movement is going? I mean, like, what is the future of this?
Well, you know, we are speaking of this when we've had a whole battery of lawyers standing behind people like Sadiq Kapen, Anand Teltumbade, all the Bhima Koregaon accused. We have lawyers there and fighting battles. They may be a handful of the entire cohort of lawyers in the country. But even at that time, they were only a handful. And they did amazing things. And I think the lawyers today are also trying under very hard circumstances to do amazing things and are putting themselves out really, in a zone of risk. Yeah? And not just lawyers, a lot of public intellectuals, journalists. Journalists were a big part of the struggle that he waged then. We still have journalists putting themselves out. So I wouldn't actually, go too far with an argument. Yes, he's irreplaceable. He's my father. I loved him dearly. He's the person I was most emotionally fused to. He's also the person I was more intellectually fused to. So he is irreplaceable, and I will never argue with that. Everybody loved him. I wish everybody should love him. But I wouldn't extend that to say that we don't have that possibility today. I think just on the strength of the work that generation must pass. Every generation must pass. But I think that on the strength of the work that generation has done, the next following generations will be able to build. And one of my main ideas of putting this book together in this form was precisely that it gives you the protocols and the technologies and the thoughts that go into making civil liberties lawyering. Because his Telugu column, in fact, spoke about a wide range of issues. Some of those were already written about by him in Wages of Impunity, and then they were translated into Telugu. So in this volume, what I did was that I just took out the cases that he personally argued, either before courts or in citizens' tribunals, fact-finding commissions. Every one of these 18 chapters are chapters of cases that he argued personally. On panchayat in scheduled areas, which preceded PISA, on Afzal Guru's hanging when he was representing Shaukat Guru in the same parliament attack case, on the peace process in Andhra, in which he was an interlocutor, on Chundur, in which he appeared several times, the Chundur massacre of Dalits, for which he appeared several times in the AP High Court, while the trial was in process in Chundur. The Coimbatore bomb blasts case, where he defended the accused in the bomb blasts case in Coimbatore, all Muslim defendants. The Shankar Guha Niyogi, where he represented the CBI and charged the industrialists in Chhattisgarh with conspiracy to murder Shankar Guha Niyogi. because of his trade union activities. The emergency cases, where he filed close to 300 petitions challenging arbitrary arrests and fake encounters during emergency. The fact-finding against fake encounters before the Tarkunde Committee, which he, Arun Shourie, Justice Tarkunde were key persons in. The Naxalite conspiracy cases in which he got acquittals in all the cases in Andhra in which he appeared. So every one of these, he actually gives a nuts and bolts account of what he did with a particular case and how the politics of the state knitted with impunity in criminalizing politics by political dissenters. And how do you then present that view in court and make it arguable and make it a winnable case in terms of evidentiary standards, in terms of adherence to procedural standards? Yeah, so he gives you the technology of human rights lawyering, the ethics of human rights lawyering in very, very specific terms. And that is what I was actually interested in putting out to a more broad-based readership, because I'm hoping that this then will be some kind of a toolkit for young lawyers and law students in their journeys in the law intergenerationally.
Okay, so I think this is related to your this answer. Do you think that this in these days, like earlier also, that death penalty was used as a political tool to oppress freedom of speech? Either it is against a human rights activist, because sir was also asking or like discussing about these things with like various kinds of example. So do you think that this was like this death penalty was used by politicians or political parties against human rights activist or like any person like they don't like?
Well, I wouldn't say used against human rights activists. After the 1975 hanging of the Naxalite prisoners, Bhumaya and Kishtagaud, there haven't been political hangings of political dissenters. All of them, or most of them, up to this time, up to 2010, managed to get sentences commuted to life. But of course, death penalty is two things. One, it is political. So if you are from Kashmir, if you are, classified as a terrorist and go through an unfair trial, then the only answer in the law, and you don't even have to go as far as politicians. Even our judiciary is not uniform in its rejection of the death penalty. Yeah? So terror offenses. So which kind of politics gets classified as terror and which doesn't? What is the color? Is it saffron? Is it green? Is it red? Is it purple? What is the color of politics that gets classified as terror? I think this is a really important question. And this was one of the questions that Kannabiran constantly asked. In fact, one of the last chapters has to do with his sitting on the Citizens Tribunal in Gujarat in 2002. Yeah? So what is terror and what isn't terror is something that's always up for definition. But also common, he opposed the execution of people accused of crime. Rape and murder, gruesome murder. He said, put them behind the bars. Give them life imprisonment. In fact, in Subhani's case that he talks about, and Subhani actually killed a girl student he was stalking in the exam hall in Vijayawada. So the lawyers in the Vijayawada bar decided to boycott him and not represent him. He was awarded the death penalty. And Kannabiran opposed the lawyers' bar and said, you can't boycott. He appeared for Subhani. He argued, he did not plead that Subhani was not guilty because the evidence was there against Subhani, but he did get the death sentence commuted to life. So there was a very strong bottom line, and it is two different positions. You can be abolitionist about the death penalty. You need not be abolitionist about the death penalty. He was an abolitionist. So it didn't matter whether it was political or ordinary crime. And he does discuss that in fair detail, the difference between political crime and ordinary crime in the chapters in his book.
Yes, yes. So I think still I have too many questions, but I think because of time, I think let us sum up with this certain kind of things. Then like floor is open for others. So I think can you recall him, ma'am, with like his certain kind of very legendary role towards like that inspired you still to work for human rights things and all? Because I think you are the very close person to him. So I think many moment that you can recall, but if so, you can share with us like certain things.
Yeah, I think what I might do is to just, I have a preface and an introduction in the book. And I have some paragraphs in the preface that are really my favorite. So I can just read out a few lines from the preface. And I'd also like, before we throw the floor open, I'd also like to read out one short paragraph from his chapter on Gujarat. Yeah. When emergency was declared in June 1975, I was 5 months short of my 14th birthday with a mysterious new board exam. Tougher than ever before, parents and teachers were warned, hovering menacingly overhead. Mine was the first batch of the ICSE in November-December 1975. In the fancy dress event organized as part of the school's Teachers' Day that year, in September, I wore a white cotton sari, powdered my cropped hair, put on a pair of borrowed spectacles, and read out Indira Gandhi's speech declaring emergency. I have a vivid memory of myself reciting the opening lines of that speech. I quote, "The President has proclaimed an emergency. This is nothing to panic about," unquote. I do not remember discussing what I would do at home. In fact, I don't recall any conversations except about how I would cross the hurdles of this monstrous exam. With my teachers worried that I would dent the 100% pass figure that every school desperately wanted. Like my parents, I was a mediocre student with no aspiration to excel in school. My mother vexed the teachers at the last parent-teacher meeting with her nonchalant response that she was not really concerned with the school tally. She was caught in a cusp. My father clearly was busy keeping another tally, as is evident from his accounts in this book, of prisoners, of those detained in jails, in illegal detention facilities, and those being shot in encounters. In the middle of this, my sister Chitra, a year older, was tasked with chaperoning me and glowering at an aging rogue tuition master with roving hands, who was entrusted by my somewhat desperate harum-scarum mother to teach me math so I could catch up with the syllabus less than a month before the exam. On my 14th birthday that year, 1st December 1975, in the middle of my board exams, Bhumaya and Kishtagaud were hanged in Mashirabad jail in Hyderabad. My parents had both spent the previous night on the pavement outside the jail and returned home that morning on my birthday after the execution in deep mourning. This was the atmosphere of my growing. So at what time did his work in human rights begin to influence me? I don't know. Why did I choose, of all the national characters we have for fancy dress, why did I choose Indira Gandhi and her emergency speech? I will never know. But that's what I did.
Yes, I think this is the like very lovely part of this book. When I gone through, then I understand like what kind of difficulties was faced by a human rights activist family person. So here daughter is telling, like Vasant ma'am's idea is also there, how she was facing, like she was interacted with her student. So those part is also very relevant. I think so that's why if any person is like interested in human rights, judicial things, or to understand the challenges of human rights activists or judiciary also, the actual platform of judiciary, they should understand the like notion of book or they should read this book. So I think I personally recommend this book to my student also, to my colleague also, and I think whoever is present here, not only because like you want to understand what was happening in Afzal Guru or Andhra Pradesh, you must be understand what is actually doing by judiciary also. Their life also you have to understand. And the, like, especially the family members notion. So I think this is a very good thing for everyone. I think now, ma'am.
Can I just read 4 lines from the second last chapter and we'll open this up. This is his chapter on the Citizens Tribunal in Gujarat in 2002, led by Justice Krishna Iyer, of which he was a member. So he spent 3 weeks, 23 days to be precise, in Gujarat, hearing 2,400 witnesses to the violence, including Haran Pandya, who was later killed. And I quote his last concluding paragraph in that chapter. A formal compliance with the law, a routine engagement with justice will not keep justice alive. The Constitution says that justice, political, social, and economic, should inform all the institutions of the state. Our campaign for a secular democracy should commence from this statement in the preamble. For, as Lord Griffiths said, oppression does not stand on the doorstep with a toothbrush mustache and a swastika armband. Unquote.
Thank you, I think. So, yes, question answer platform is open. Yes.
What are the chances that Shoma Sen will be released?
I don't know. She shouldn't be in. None of them should be in. Sai Baba should not be in. The minute I was coming to Nagpur, I could only think about the Nagpur bench of the Bombay High Court. Yeah? Sai Baba should not be in. But who knows? I'm sorry. I don't know the answer to that question.
So my question is about death penalty and rape. So you have in your work often referred to rape as, patriarchal violence, and even in this book, the chapter where, I think it's the 10th chapter, where there's a section about death penalty and rape, Kannabiran also, talks about it as, violence, rape as patriarchal violence, also talks about marital rape. So my question is, in what ways does your view depart from your father's view, and in what ways do you think today, after Nirbhaya, after the cases that we've had, and after the discussions about marital rape that we have been having, how are things different now in this particular area?
The first article I co-authored with my father, which was published in The Hindu in 1999. In fact, that's the only article which was written jointly by me, my mother, and my father, called Death as Deterrent. It was about death penalty for rape. And as far as the death penalty goes, I'm abolitionist. I completely, without reservations, oppose the death penalty. You could say that's my politics. You could say that's my father's legacy. You could say it's both. Yeah, because I can't actually separate those strands or pull them apart. The test, of course, is that if you say that there should be death penalty for rape, then what would you do if marital rape was made a crime? If marital rape was criminalized, what would you do with this argument about death penalty for rape? Because marital rape very often, and I worked in a women's group as a social legal counselor, and I know that marital rape is often aggravated form of daily heightened rape that accumulates over a very long period. So what would we say to the death penalty for rape in the question, in the case of marital rape? Also, I think that's a question Kannabiran asks in that segment on death penalty for rape, where he says, how come that these same people who want the death penalty for gruesome murder will never support the death penalty for husbands guilty of murdering or assaulting wives in the most dreadful manner? You will never ask for a death penalty for a husband for killing his wife or torturing his wife and then killing her. It may be the most gruesome form. So there are then several slippages in our argument for the death penalty, if we support the death penalty. But, has the situation changed? I think not. I don't think the death penalty reduces the number of rapes. I don't think the death penalty for declaring the death penalty for people accused of rape will sort out the patriarchal problem. It won't. The solutions lie elsewhere, and not in the kind of political tokenism of, like he says, increasing the catalog instead of decreasing it. We are saying get rid of the death penalty, and instead you're just increasing the catalog of offenses that go into the death penalty category.
We can have one last question.
Yes.
You are pro-life, in the sense about you are.
No, I'm not pro-life.
Sorry.
I'm anti-death penalty.
Yeah. Okay. What about the closure to the families of the victim? Number one. Number two, when we say life imprisonment, you know what happens, what happened in Gujarat recently. So how do you plug that?
There are many kinds of responses that victims' families will have. For instance, in Nirbhaya's case, the parents, especially the mother, was very clear that she wanted the death penalty. The point is that the law and justice does not aim at, fulfilling individual closures, because there are hundreds of thousands of cases, and you will have hundreds of thousands of responses. There is a classification. For a particular offense, there is a particular penalty to award which you must follow a particular procedure. So that procedure having been followed, the question is on the penalty. The question is not that they should not be convicted. Closure is on conviction. You can't say, take so-and-so's life and that will be my closure to my loss of life. You can say you must convict the person for the offense they have committed. And that conviction is deemed as closure in law. And of course we know, you are talking about the case of remission granted to Bilkis Banu's assailants. You have that on the one side. On the other side, you have the encounter deaths of 4 extremely poor suspects 3 days after they are apprehended in Hyderabad city in 2019. You have not gone through the investigation. There is no trial. There is no evidence gathered. Nothing. You have caught hold of 4 people. You have shot them at point blank range and killed them. So there is no sense of closure. I mean, we may argue, for argument's sake, yeah, killing 4 men is equal. But is killing 4 men equal to the life of the veterinarian who died? Those equivalences are never possible. If you had to, you killed the 4 people who were convicted of Nirbhaya's murder. does that form an equivalence to Nirbhaya's life? My argument is no. So I think that the problem is with false equivalences. And as individuals, as citizens committed to the values of the Constitution, it's also our responsibility to educate ourselves and those around us on what is justice under the law. What is closure under the law? Is retribution closure? Retribution can never be closure. And the law can never be retributive. What do we have the Constitution for? Yeah?
And I think you can read one chapter in this where actually Madam is discussing about if death penalty not, then what? Because they are not telling that we are not giving death penalty. It does not mean we should not give any kind of punishment. So very good debate is in like this book. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, ma'am. Thank you, Ms. Kannabiran, for dropping those knowledge bombs and giving us this extremely enlightening session. Thank you so much, everyone. To express our appreciation, we shall be resorting to a picture rather than mere 1,000 words. It gives me great joy to ask our moderator to present our author with a very special painting made for her by Saili Chaudhary from Alag Angle community. I request Saili Chaudhary to kindly be on stage and present the painting to our author along with Ms. Neetu Kumari. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you so much, readers, for your patience and time. Thank you, ma'am.